Vika looked around, and her gaze fell on an old door that creaked when she accidentally bumped into it. A strange sound from around the corner made everyone freeze. The wind seemed to be whistling through the vents, but in this building littered with trash and old construction material, every noise could have been something more sinister. She stepped forward, and at that moment the floor beneath her cracked sharply. Vika didn't even have time to scream before she found herself downstairs, in complete darkness. The ground was cold and the air was stale. The only odor she could smell in the darkness was dampness. She tried to get up, but pain rolled through her body. And at that moment, amidst the silence, Vika heard something eerie, the scraping of something heavy behind the wall. Chapter 1. The Meow Under the Balcony. The morning light crept softly into Vika's room on the 9th floor of a towering apartment building. Her small desk was cluttered with colorful pens, half-finished drawings, and a crumpled math worksheet she had stubbornly ignored the night before. Posters of bright constellations and distant galaxies decorated her walls. But today, the universe outside her window had something entirely different planned. She stretched lazily, glancing at the dusty glow filtering through the curtains. The usual sounds of city life drifted in, the faint hum of traffic, distant voices of early risers, and the occasional barking of a neighbor's dog. But then, something unusual pierced through the background noise. A faint, desperate meow. Vika froze, her heart skipping a beat. She tilted her head, listening carefully. Another meow followed, thin and raspy, carried upward by the morning breeze. Without hesitation, she rushed to the balcony, barefoot, the cold tiles sending a small shiver up her spine. Peering over the metal railing, her sharp eyes scanned the small courtyard below, boxed in by towering apartment walls and lined with old rusted garbage bins. A patch of wild grass grew stubbornly through the cracks in the pavement, defying the grayness around it. And there, wedged tightly between two large metal dumpsters, was a small, trembling ball of fur. A kitten. Its tiny face peeked out from the shadows, eyes wide with fear, its thin tail flicking weakly. Vika's heart clenched. Without thinking, she dashed back inside, pulling on her sneakers, grabbing the first hoodie she could find, and sprinting out the door. She barely noticed the elevator was too slow, taking the stairs two at a time, her breath quickening with both excitement and worry. The world outside felt bigger somehow as she burst into the courtyard. She rushed toward the dumpsters, ignoring the faint metallic smell mixed with old food and city dust. The kitten was even smaller up close, thin, with dirty white fur streaked with gray smudges. Its tiny paw was caught between two jagged metal edges, and every time it tried to pull free, it let out another weak cry. "Shoo, it's okay, little one," Vika whispered, her voice soft and steady despite her racing heart. She knelt down, her fingers carefully reaching for the frightened creature. The metal was cold and sharp, and the kitten hissed weakly, its tiny body trembling with fear. Vika winced as she accidentally brushed against the jagged edge, scratching her hand, but she didn't stop. After what felt like forever, with gentle patience and whispered encouragements, she managed to free the kitten's paw. It was scraped and swollen, but not bleeding too badly. She cradled the fragile bundle in her arms, feeling its rapid heartbeat against her chest. "You're safe now," she murmured, stroking its dirty fur. Vika carried the kitten upstairs, her mind already racing with what to do next. She needed to help it, but she also knew what her parents would say. They were strict about pets. No animals in the apartment, no exceptions. Still, she had to try. Bursting through the front door, she found her mom in the kitchen, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Her dad sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, sipping coffee. "Mom, Dad, look what I found," Vika exclaimed, holding the kitten out like a treasure. Her mother turned, her eyes widening in surprise. "Vika, what on earth?" He was stuck between the dumpsters. He was crying, and his paws hurt. "We have to help him." Vika's words tumbled out in a rush. Her dad frowned, setting his cup down. "Vika, you can't just bring stray animals into the house. You don't know where it's been, or what it might have." "But he's hurt," Vika protested, her voice trembling with frustration. We can't just leave him. Her mother sighed, wiping her hands on a towel. Sweetheart, I know you mean well, but we don't have the time or space to take care of a kitten. It's not that simple. Vika's heart sank. She looked down at the kitten, who stared back with glassy eyes, too weak to move. She felt tears sting at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. If her parents wouldn't help, she'd find another way. That evening, as the sky outside turned shades of pink and orange, Vika sat quietly in her room, the kitten hidden in a small cardboard box with an old towel. She watched him sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Her mind was already spinning with ideas. She couldn't give up. She wouldn't. She leaned in, whispering softly, "Don't worry. I'm going to prove I can take care of you." And with that promise, an idea began to form. A plan that would become the beginning of an adventure Vika never expected. Chapter 2. Operation Rescue Mission. The next morning, Vika couldn't focus on anything. Not her homework, not the cartoons playing faintly in the background, not even her favorite cereal, which sat untouched and soggy in its bowl. Her thoughts were glued to one thing, the tiny kitten sleeping in a shoebox under her bed, hidden beneath an old blanket. She knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed help, trusted allies who wouldn't snitch to the adults. By afternoon, Vika gathered her two best friends, Moshe and Dennis, in their usual meeting spot, an old, slightly rusty bench near the sandbox in the courtyard, partly hidden by scraggly bushes. It was their headquarters, where many of their wildest plans had been hatched, from organizing epic snowball fights to building secret forts. But today's mission was different. This wasn't about games. It was real. Vika leaned in, her voice low and serious. "I need your help. It's about a kitten." Moshe's eyes sparkled with curiosity. She had thick braids and an adventurous spirit, always the first to climb the highest tree or explore the creepiest corners of their neighborhood. Dennis, on the other hand, was more cautious. His glasses always slid down his nose when he got nervous, which happened often. "What kind of help?" Moshe asked, already intrigued. Vika told them everything, how she'd found the kitten stuck between dumpsters, how she'd rescued it, and how her parents had refused to let her keep it. She described the kitten's tiny injured paw and the way it looked at her with those wide, helpless eyes. "We can't just let him go," Vika finished, her voice fierce. "I'm going to prove I can take care of him. But I need you guys." Moshe grinned. "I'm in." Dennis hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "This sounds complicated. What if we get caught?" "Then we don't get caught," Vika replied, crossing her arms. "We'll make a plan. A real one. Like spies." Dennis sighed but nodded. He couldn't resist the pull of an adventure, no matter how nervous he felt. They huddled together, drawing a rough map of the apartment building in Vika's notebook. She assigned roles like a military commander planning an operation. Vika would be the leader, responsible for the kitten's care. Moshe was the supply officer, in charge of sneaking food and water from home. Dennis became the lookout, his job to warn them if any adults were nearby. Their first mission was clear: find a safer hiding place for the kitten. Vika's bedroom was too risky. Her parents could discover the shoebox any day. But there was one place no adult ever cared to check: the building's basement. That evening, with the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, they carried out Operation Rescue Mission. Vika carefully tucked the kitten into her backpack, padding it with a soft towel to keep him warm and comfortable. His small face peeked out nervously, but he didn't make a sound. It was as if he sensed the importance of their secret mission. The basement entrance was a rusty metal door tucked behind the stairwell, often overlooked. Dennis stood guard at the corner, peeking around to make sure no curious neighbors wandered too close. Moshe skillfully picked the lock with a hairpin she claimed to have borrowed from her sister's drawer. It wasn't her first time breaking into locked places. Not for anything bad, of course, just for their usual explorations. The door creaked open with a groan that made them all freeze. They waited, hearts pounding, but no footsteps echoed in response. Inside, the basement was cold and smelled of damp concrete and old metal. Flickering fluorescent lights cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. The floor was littered with forgotten boxes, dusty bicycles, and broken furniture. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping occasionally with a soft plink, plink, that echoed too loudly in the stillness. Moshe found an empty storage nook in the corner, half hidden behind stacked cardboard boxes. It was just big enough to set up a makeshift bed using an old blanket they'd brought. They even placed a small bowl of water and some leftover chicken Moshe had snuck from dinner. The kitten curled up in the blanket, his tired eyes slowly closing. He seemed content, at least for now. But as they prepared to leave, something made them stop in their tracks. A sound. Not the soft drip of water or the faint hum of the pipes. This was different. Low, shuffling footsteps somewhere deeper in the basement. Dennis's eyes grew wide behind his glasses. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, clutching Vika's arm. Moshe frowned, trying to peer into the darkness. Maybe it's just an old pipe or a rat. But the footsteps continued, faint but steady. Without waiting to investigate, they grabbed their flashlights and scrambled out, locking the basement door behind them. Their hearts raced all the way home. That night, Vika couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, wondering about the strange noises. Was it just her imagination? Or had someone, or something, been down there with them? In the middle of the night, she sat up suddenly. A sound again. Not from outside this time. It was coming from the basement. Without thinking, she threw on her hoodie and tiptoed out of her room. She crept past her parents' door, heart pounding, and slipped outside. The air was colder now, the courtyard eerily silent. She reached the basement door, her flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. The door was ajar. Her heart sank. She pushed it open, shining the beam of light into the shadows. The blanket was there. The little bowl of water was tipped over. But the kitten was gone. Chapter 3. The Disappearance. The next morning, Vika woke up with a jolt, her heart racing even before her eyes fully opened. Memories of the previous night flooded back. The cold basement, the eerie footsteps, the empty blanket. She had barely slept, tossing and turning, hoping it had all been a bad dream. But deep down, she knew the truth. The kitten was gone. She didn't even wait for breakfast. Pulling on her jacket over her pajamas, she dashed outside, her messy hair whipping in the morning breeze. Moshe and Dennis were already waiting by the bench, their faces tense. "He's not there," Vika blurted out before they could ask. "I checked last night. Someone took him." Moshe clenched her fists. "Then we'll find him." Dennis nodded, though his eyes darted nervously toward the basement door. "But what if it was? You know, something down there?" Vika shook her head sharply. "I don't care what it was. We're getting him back. The search begins." They started by searching the basement again, flashlights sweeping through the dusty corners. The blanket was still crumpled in the storage nook, and the little bowl lay on its side, dried chicken scattered nearby. "Look," Moshe whispered, pointing to the floor. Tiny paw prints, faint but visible in the thin layer of dust, led away from the nook. Vika's heart jumped. The tracks were small and uneven, as if the kitten had been limping. They followed the trail deeper into the basement, past creaky pipes and rusty shelves. The footprints stopped in front of an old metal door labeled "Technical Room," authorized personnel only. The paint was chipped, and the door hung slightly ajar. Vika reached for the handle, but before she could pull it open, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" The voice boomed behind them, making Dennis yelp and drop his flashlight. They spun around to see Sergei, the grumpy building janitor. He was a tall man with a thick mustache, wearing his usual faded work jacket and scuffed boots. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him, and avoided him. He had a reputation for being strict and always scolding kids for playing where they shouldn't. "This is a restricted area," Sergei barked, glaring down at them. "You kids aren't allowed here. Go home before I tell your parents." But Vika started, her voice trembling with frustration. "We're looking for my kitten. He's missing, and we think he's in there." Sergei crossed his arms. "Not my problem. This place is dangerous. Pipes, wires, old equipment. You could get hurt. Now scram." Dennis tugged at Vika's sleeve, urging her to leave, but Vika's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to yell, to argue, to explain how important this was. But Sergei's hard stare made her swallow her words. Defeated, they trudged back upstairs. The weight of failure. Vika sat on the cold concrete steps outside her building, staring at the ground. The day felt gray and heavy, even though the sun was shining. "I should have been smarter," she muttered. "I should have kept him in my room. I promised I'd take care of him. And now he's gone." Moshe sat beside her, silent for once. Dennis hovered awkwardly, not knowing what to say. For the first time since their mission began, Vika felt like giving up. But fate had other plans. The mysterious note. When Vika finally dragged herself back home, her mom was in the kitchen, talking on the phone, and her dad was nowhere in sight. She slipped inside quietly, her heart still heavy. As she reached for her bedroom door, something caught her eye. A small piece of paper was tucked under the doorframe. Frowning, she picked it up. The handwriting was messy, scribbled with a pen that had almost run out of ink. Just one line. "I know where your kitten is." Her heart skipped a beat. There was no name, no instructions. Just that single chilling sentence. Vika's eyes darted around the hallway. Who had left this? And how did they know about the kitten? Her sadness evaporated, replaced by a surge of determination. This wasn't over. Not even close. Chapter 4. The Mysterious Ally. The note burned in Vika's pocket all day. A small, crumpled piece of paper carrying 1,000 questions. She couldn't focus on anything else. Not her mom asking about homework. Not Dennis texting her with nervous updates. Not even the usual noise of life in the apartment complex. Someone knew where her kitten was. After dinner, as the sky dimmed into shades of purple and gray, Vika slipped outside, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't tell Moshe or Dennis. This was something she had to face on her own. The mysterious boy. Vika found him leaning against the rusted railing near the stairwell of the neighboring building. A tall boy, maybe 13 or 14, with dark, messy hair falling into his sharp eyes. His name was Artur, and everyone in the neighborhood knew him as the kid who always got into trouble. He rarely spoke to anyone, and when he did, it was usually to tell younger kids to buzz off. Vika had always avoided him. Until now. "You left this," she said, holding up the note. Artur didn't deny it. He just shrugged, as if leaving cryptic messages under doors was something he did all the time. "I saw you and your friends in the basement," he said. "You're looking for a kitten." Vika swallowed hard, nodding. "Do you know where he is?" Artur smirked slightly but didn't answer right away. Instead, he kicked a loose stone with the toe of his sneaker. "Maybe. But I don't do favors for free." Vika's heart sank. "What do you want?" He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in. "I'll show you where I think your kitten is," he whispered. "But you have to keep a secret for me. You can't tell anyone. Not your friends, not your parents. No one." Vika hesitated. Secrets were heavy things, and she already felt weighed down by the ones she was keeping. But this was for the kitten. "I promise," she said quietly. Artur nodded. "Follow me." The last place seen. They crept around the back of the apartment buildings, where the shadows were thick and the streetlights flickered weakly. Artur led her to the far end of the block, past the old playground with the broken swings, to a narrow alley Vika had never noticed before. "This is where I saw him," Artur said, pointing to a gap under a rusty metal fence. "Last night, there was some movement here. I thought it was just rats, but then I heard meowing." Vika knelt, peering through the gap. On the other side was an overgrown yard filled with weeds and debris. Beyond that, looming like a forgotten giant, stood an abandoned building, its windows shattered, doors hanging crooked on their hinges, graffiti covering the crumbling walls. Her stomach tightened. "You think he's in there?" she whispered. Artur nodded. "That place has lots of holes and tunnels underneath. Easy for a small animal to get lost." The secret exchange. Before she could thank him, Artur grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Remember our deal," he said. "You promised." Vika stared at him, trying to read the shadowed expression on his face. "What's your secret?" she asked cautiously. He hesitated, then pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small, battered key. "This opens a door in the basement of our building," he murmured. "It's supposed to be locked forever. But I go there sometimes. To get away. You can't tell anyone. If they find out, they'll seal it up for good." Vika nodded slowly, the weight of the promise settling over her. "I won't tell," she said. Satisfied, Artur handed her the key. "In case you need help getting in," he added. A dangerous decision. That night, Vika lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the key clutched tightly in her hand. She could still hear Artur's words echoing in her head. Lots of holes and tunnels underneath. Easy for a small animal to get lost. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't wait until morning. The kitten might not survive another night alone. So, with her flashlight tucked under her hoodie and the key hidden in her pocket, Vika slipped out of her apartment, her heart racing with fear and excitement. The abandoned building loomed ahead in the darkness, its broken windows like empty eyes watching her approach. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Chapter 5. The Night Adventure. The city's lights faded behind them as Vika and her friends stood at the edge of the abandoned building. The crumbling structure loomed in the darkness like a forgotten giant, its shattered windows reflecting the flicker of distant streetlights. The air smelled of rust, dust, and something faintly metallic. Vika adjusted the straps of her small backpack, her heart thumping like a drum. Inside were the essentials: a flashlight, a coil of rope borrowed from Dennis's dad's garage, a bottle of water, and a few snacks, just in case. Dennis carried extra batteries and an old pocket knife he'd insisted on bringing for emergencies. Moshe had duct tape, bandages, and a notebook, as if writing things down might help them stay brave. This was more than a rescue mission. It was an adventure, the kind they'd always dreamed of, but it felt scarier now that it was real. Preparation for the mission. They huddled under the flickering glow of a street lamp, whispering their final plans. "Okay," Vika said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We stick together, no matter what. No running off alone. We follow the sounds, find the kitten, and get out fast." Moshe nodded, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. Dennis gave a shaky thumbs up. Vika took a deep breath and led the way. They squeezed through a narrow gap in the rusty fence, the metal scraping against their jackets. The grass was overgrown, and broken glass crunched softly under their feet. The building's entrance gaped open, door long gone, revealing a dark maw that seemed to swallow the faint moonlight whole. Vika clicked on her flashlight. "Let's go." Inside the abandoned building. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling wallpaper, collapsed furniture, and dusty footprints. Maybe from other kids who dared to explore, or maybe something else. The floorboards groaned under their weight, brittle with age. Shadows danced on the cracked walls, stretching like long, bony fingers. The air was colder inside, heavy with the scent of dampness and decay. As they moved deeper, the old building seemed to breathe around them. Groans from shifting beams, faint echoes of their own footsteps, and something else. A soft scratching noise. Vika froze, holding up her hand to signal the others to stop. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Dennis swallowed hard. "Maybe it's just rats." But then came the sound that made Vika's heart leap, a faint, desperate meow. The kitten was close. They followed the sound down a dark hallway, littered with debris and broken glass. Doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Their flashlights flickered slightly, casting shaky circles of light. Vika's heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. Unexpected danger. Just as they turned a corner, The floor beneath Vika gave a sickening crack. She barely had time to scream. The rotting wood collapsed under her feet, and she plunged down, the world spinning into darkness. She landed hard, the breath knocked out of her. Dust filled the air, and pain shot through her ankle. She coughed, trying to sit up, her flashlight flickering weakly beside her. Above, Moshe and Dennis's terrified faces peered down through the hole. "Vika!" Moshe shouted. "Are you okay?" Vika winced, testing her ankle. It hurt, but nothing felt broken. "I'm okay," she croaked, though her heart was pounding with fear. "I think I twisted my ankle." Dennis fumbled with the rope, his hands shaking as he tried to tie it around a sturdy beam. Moshe lay flat on the floor, reaching down as far as she could. "Hold on, Vika," she whispered. "We'll get you out." Courage and friendship. It wasn't easy. The rope was old, and Dennis wasn't exactly an expert in knots. But they worked together, determined not to leave Vika behind. Moshe's voice never stopped. Soft encouragements, silly jokes to keep Vika calm. Dennis's hands grew steadier as he focused on the task. With a lot of effort and even more determination, they managed to pull Vika up, grunting with the strain. When she finally rolled onto the solid floor, all three of them collapsed in a heap, laughing breathlessly with relief. "That was intense," Dennis panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. Vika grinned, even though her ankle throbbed. "We're not done yet." The intriguing sound. As if to remind them, the faint meowing returned. Closer this time, louder. But something was different. There was another sound. A soft rustling behind the wall, like footsteps, or something being dragged. The friends exchanged nervous glances. The kitten wasn't alone. Chapter 6. The Rescue and a New Risk. The weak meowing grew louder as Vika, Moshe, and Dennis limped toward the crumbling doorway. Their flashlights flickered over the debris-strewn floor, casting shaky shadows on the cracked walls. Vika's ankle throbbed with every step, but she didn't care. The kitten was close, so close she could almost feel its tiny heartbeat against her palms. They turned a corner, and there it was. The kitten. Huddled in the corner of a dusty room, its fur matted and dirty, eyes wide with fear. But that wasn't what made Vika's breath catch in her throat. Next to the kitten was a dog. Not just any dog. A large, scruffy stray with patches of missing fur, ribs visible under its coarse coat, and sharp, wary eyes that gleamed in the flashlight beam. It stood protectively over the kitten, teeth bared in a low growl, its whole body tense. This was its territory, its nest, and it wasn't about to let them take the kitten without a fight. On the edge, Vika froze. One wrong move could send the dog lunging. Moshe grabbed Vika's arm, her whisper trembling. "What do we do now?" Dennis gulped, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, though his shaking hands betrayed his fear. Vika's mind raced. They couldn't just leave the kitten. But the dog, it was scared, maybe even more scared than they were. She saw it in its eyes, not just aggression, but hunger, desperation. This wasn't a bad dog. It was surviving. She took a deep breath. "Think. Vika. Think." A clever plan. An idea sparked. "Dennis," she whispered. "Do you still have those snacks?" Dennis blinked, then fumbled in his backpack, pulling out a crumpled bag of crackers and a squished sandwich. Vika grabbed the sandwich, ripped it in half, and crouched slowly, holding it out. The dog's growl softened, its nose twitching. Hunger battled with caution. Vika tossed one half of the sandwich across the room. The dog's head snapped toward it, ears perked. Then, after a tense pause, it lunged for the food. "Now, go, Moshe," Vika hissed. Moshe darted forward, scooping up the trembling kitten. The dog snapped its head back, growling again, but Dennis hurled the rest of the sandwich in the opposite direction, buying them precious seconds. "Run!" Vika shouted. The escape. They bolted. Vika's ankle screamed with every step, but adrenaline drowned out the pain. Moshe cradled the kitten against her chest, its tiny heart pounding in terror. Dennis held the flashlight, leading the way through dark hallways and collapsing floors. As they sprinted toward the exit, Dennis shoved open a rusted metal door with all his strength. The hinges shrieked in protest, and with a loud crack, the frame buckled, sending a chunk of debris crashing to the ground. They didn't stop to look back. They tumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, hearts racing, the kittens safe in their arms. But the noise had drawn attention. Lights flickered on in nearby apartments. Voices echoed through the courtyard. They'd been caught. The consequences. Within minutes, adults surrounded them. Concerned neighbors, curious onlookers, and worst of all, Vika's mom. Her face was a mix of relief and fury. "What were you thinking?" she shouted, pulling Vika into a tight, shaking hug before holding her at arm's length. "You could have been hurt. Or worse." Vika tried to explain, words tumbling out about the kitten, the dog, the plan, but her mother wasn't listening. The fear in her eyes had turned to anger, the kind that comes from love and terror all at once. "You're grounded," her mom snapped, dragging Vika home with a firm grip. "No more adventures. No more secrets." Vika didn't argue. Not because she agreed, but because her throat felt tight, her heart heavy. She'd saved the kitten, but had she disappointed her mom beyond repair? The intriguing discovery. Later that night, as the apartment grew quiet and Vika stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint purr of the rescued kitten asleep beside her, she heard her mom's footsteps in the hallway. The door creaked open slightly. Vika pretended to be asleep, but her mom didn't leave right away. She lingered. Then Vika heard the soft rustle of paper. Her mom had found her notebook, the one where Vika had written everything. Their plans, their fears, their victories and mistakes. The door closed gently. Vika's heart raced. What would her mom think when she read it? Chapter 7. The Price of the Truth. It was an unusually quiet evening when Vika's mother came into her room. Vika had just finished a long day of school and was sitting by the window, gazing out at the bustling street below. Her mind kept wandering back to the little kitten, the one she had rescued from behind the trash bins, the one who had somehow become the center of her world in such a short time. Vika's mother held her diary in her hands, a quiet but firm expression on her face. Vika knew what was coming. She had found it. There was no way to hide the truth anymore. She had read the diary, every word, every plan. Every mission that had seemed so innocent to Vika now felt exposed. The secret was out. Vika's heart sank. She hadn't meant for her mother to find out this way. She thought she had been careful, but now, with her mother standing in front of her, Vika felt completely vulnerable. Her mother didn't say anything at first. She simply sat down beside Vika on the bed, looking at the diary with a mix of concern and disbelief. Vika felt her throat tighten. She had been caught. It was inevitable. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice softer than Vika had expected. "You've become quite attached to that kitten, haven't you?" she said, her eyes meeting Vika's with a kind of knowing understanding. Vika swallowed hard, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure if she could explain why it was so important to her, why this little creature had captured her heart so fully. All she knew was that she couldn't abandon him. She had to help him, to make him better. "Yes," Vika replied softly. "I can't just leave him there, Mom. He's so small, and he needs me. I promised him that I would take care of him." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, a mixture of concern and curiosity in her eyes. Finally, she sighed deeply, setting the diary down on the table. "I understand that you care for him, Vika. But you have to understand something," her mother began, her voice calm but firm. "Taking care of a pet is not like playing with a toy. It's not something you can just do when you feel like it and then forget about it. A pet needs constant care. It needs attention, it needs food, it needs love, and most of all, it needs responsibility." Vika's heart raced as her mother continued. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what she was about to hear, but she couldn't stop listening. "I can't just let you have the kitten because you want him. There are so many things you need to understand about having a pet, Vika. It's a big responsibility, and I need to know you're ready for that." Vika's eyes welled up with tears. She had thought about all of this already. She had read books on animal care, and she had made plans. She knew she was ready. But hearing her mother say it out loud made her doubt herself. Her mother paused, her gaze softening. "I'll give you a chance to prove that you can handle this responsibility. But you need to show me that you're ready. If you can demonstrate that you are capable of caring for the kitten, then I will consider allowing you to keep him." Vika wiped away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. Her mother's words felt like both a relief and a challenge. It was a chance, yes, but it wasn't going to be easy. "I'll prove it, Mom." "I will," Vika said with determination, her voice steady now. She was going to do whatever it took. Her mother smiled, but there was a trace of skepticism in her eyes. "I want to see that you understand what it means. So, here's the deal. You have to show me that you can take care of him properly for an entire day. You'll need to follow the guidelines for feeding him, keeping him clean, and making sure he's safe. If you can do that, then we'll talk." Vika's heart raced with excitement. This was it. She had to prove herself. The test. The next day, Vika woke up early. She had a plan. She spent the morning researching everything she could about taking care of a kitten. She knew she had to get everything right. She couldn't afford to mess up. She spent hours learning about the best food for kittens, the right toys to keep them entertained, and how to create the perfect environment for him to feel safe. Vika didn't want to just care for the kitten. She wanted to give him the best life possible. She wanted him to feel at home with her. By the time her mother came into the room that afternoon, Vika had transformed her space into a little haven for the kitten. She had set up a cozy corner with blankets, a small bed, a litter box, and a bowl of water. She had prepared the food, making sure it was the right kind for his age. Vika's room had become his sanctuary, and she was proud of it. Her mother looked around the room, her face neutral. "You've done a good job setting up the space," she said after a moment. "But it's not just about setting things up. You have to be consistent. Every day." Vika nodded eagerly. "I understand. I'll make sure I do everything right." Lesson in responsibility. The day passed quickly as Vika took on the responsibility of caring for the kitten. At first, everything seemed to be going well. She fed him on time, kept his space clean, and made sure he had enough to play with. But as the day wore on, she began to realize just how difficult it was to keep up with all the tasks. The kitten was still small and fragile. He often needed extra attention, and sometimes, when she fed him, he didn't seem to want to eat. Vika began to worry. What if she wasn't doing it right? What if he wasn't getting better? At night, the kitten started to act differently. He became listless, and his eyes seemed dull. Vika's heart sank as she realized that something was wrong. She checked his temperature and found that he was warm, but not in a good way. He was burning with fever. "No, no, no," Vika whispered to herself, tears welling up in her eyes. She had tried so hard. She had done everything she could think of, and yet, it didn't seem to be enough. The kitten was sick. And no matter how much she cared for him, she couldn't fix it on her own. The twist. With her heart heavy, Vika cradled the kitten in her arms and went to her mother. "Mom, he's sick. I think he needs to go to the vet," Vika said, her voice trembling with fear. Her mother took the kitten from Vika's arms and carefully examined him. "You did your best," she said gently. "But you can't do everything by yourself. He needs medical help." Vika nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had done everything she could, but sometimes, it wasn't enough. She couldn't do this alone. The next morning, Vika and her mother rushed the kitten to the vet. They hoped it wasn't too late. The waiting felt like an eternity, and Vika couldn't help but wonder if this was the price of her own truth. Would she be able to save him? Would she be able to prove she was ready for the responsibility she had taken on? But no matter what happened, Vika had learned an important lesson. Sometimes, love and care are just the beginning. Responsibility comes with its own price. Chapter 8. The Fight for Life. Vika sat in the car beside her mother, staring out at the frozen landscape through the window. Every bump of the road felt like a blow to her chest, and she replayed everything that had happened over and over again in her mind. The kitten, the tiny creature she had wanted to save so badly, was now in her hands, and she felt like she had failed. "I'm the one to blame." Those words kept echoing in her mind. She tortured herself with every mistake, every moment when it seemed like she hadn't done enough for him. All the days she had spent carefully looking after him, making sure he was fed, played with, and rested, now seemed utterly insufficient. Everything could have been different if she had been more experienced, if she had known what to do in these kinds of situations. Her mom, noticing her daughter's silent anguish, reached out and put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Vika, you've done everything you could," she said gently, her voice warm yet firm. "We'll do everything we can to make him better. You didn't give up on him, and that's what matters most." But Vika could hardly hear her words. The only thing that mattered right now was the sick kitten, curled up in the cardboard box on the floor of the car. He had looked so frail when she found him that morning. His little body trembling with a fever, his eyes dull with pain. He was suffering, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had somehow failed him. When they finally arrived at the clinic, Vika rushed inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The vet, a kind woman with gentle eyes, immediately took the kitten into her care. Vika stood by, barely able to keep her composure, while her mom tried to comfort her. An hour later, the vet called them into her office. Her expression was serious, but not as grim as Vika had feared. "Your kitten's condition is serious, but he's stable for now," the vet explained. "He has a fever and some respiratory distress, but we can treat him. He'll need constant care for a while, but there's a good chance he'll pull through." Vika felt a small weight lift off her chest. For the first time since she had found the kitten, a glimmer of hope flickered in her heart. "That's good to hear," Vika's mom said, her voice full of relief. She looked down at her daughter, then back at the vet. "What can we do to help him?" The vet smiled. "He'll need a warm, quiet space to recover, and you'll have to make sure he gets his medication and food regularly. It's a lot of work, but you've already shown that you care, and that's the first step." Vika nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm. "I won't let him down." As they left the clinic, Vika's mom turned to her with a serious look on her face. "Vika, this is a big responsibility. If you want to keep him, you need to be prepared for everything that comes with it. You've already shown you care, but now you need to prove that you can handle it." Vika took a deep breath, feeling a new sense of resolve fill her. "I can do it. I'll make sure he's okay." Just as they were about to get into the car, a familiar voice called out from behind them. "Hey!" Vika turned to see the older boy from the neighboring building, the one who had helped her before. He was walking toward them with a concerned expression on his face. "Is he okay?" he asked, looking at the kitten, who was resting in Vika's arms. "He's stable," Vika replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "We're taking him home now." The boy nodded. "Good. You did the right thing. And you'll do great with him." Vika felt a sense of warmth spread through her chest. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the fear and doubt, she knew one thing for sure now: she wasn't alone in this. She had help, and she was ready to give her best to the kitten. As they drove back home, Vika's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. She would take care of him, she would make sure he recovered, no matter how hard it would be. She wasn't going to give up on him. And as they reached the building, Vika felt a sense of purpose settle over her. The real battle was just beginning. But she was ready. Chapter 9. A new member of the family. The days following the vet's visit had been a whirlwind of responsibility for Vika. The kitten, whom she had so desperately fought to save, was slowly beginning to regain his strength. His once dull eyes now sparkled with life, and his small body, once frail and trembling, had started to grow stronger. Each day, Vika could see how much he trusted her, how deeply they had bonded. And it was during one of those quiet moments, when she sat next to him, watching him nap contentedly, that Vika knew, without a doubt, that this little kitten was now a part of her life. One evening, as Vika was feeding him, her mother came into the room, her face unreadable. Vika's heart skipped a beat. Was her mom about to say she couldn't keep him? But instead, her mom smiled softly. "You've done a great job, Vika," she said, sitting beside her. "I've seen how much you care for him, and how much you've changed over the past few weeks. I think it's time we officially make him part of the family. You can keep him." Vika's heart soared. She had been waiting for this moment, hoping, praying, that her mom would finally see how much this kitten meant to her. "Thank you," Vika whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her mom gave her a gentle hug. "You've really grown up, Vika. I'm proud of you." As the days passed, Vika continued to take care of her new pet, now officially part of the family. She decided to name him Whiskers, inspired by their first meeting by the dumpsters, when he had looked up at her with those wide, trusting eyes. The name felt right. It felt like a reminder of everything they had been through together. But the changes weren't just in the way Vika cared for Whiskers. She found herself becoming more responsible, not just with him but in every part of her life. She helped her mom more around the house, made sure to keep her room tidy, and even took on extra chores. It was as if the act of caring for Whiskers had opened something inside her, something that made her realize how important it was to be responsible, not just for herself, but for those who depended on her. And her relationship with the boy from the neighboring building, the one who had helped her when Whiskers had been lost, had changed, too. At first, it had been awkward. They had started out as strangers, with nothing in common except for their desire to help the kitten. But now, they had formed an unspoken bond. He would come over to help with Whiskers, and they would sit together, chatting about everything and nothing. Vika began to think of him as a friend, someone she could trust. One afternoon, as they sat together in her living room, Whiskers suddenly jumped down from his perch on the windowsill and began to walk toward the door. His tail flicked back and forth in an odd, excited rhythm. He paused for a moment, turned around, and meowed at Vika, his eyes wide and alert. Vika frowned, standing up slowly. "What's going on, Whiskers?" she muttered to herself, puzzled. The kitten continued to meow, as if trying to tell her something, and then padded toward the hallway. Her friend noticed her confusion and stood up, too. "What's wrong? Does he want something?" "I'm not sure," Vika replied. "He's acting strange. It's like he wants me to follow him." With a nervous glance at each other, they both slowly followed the kitten as he led them down the hallway, toward the door leading to the apartment's storage room. Whiskers meowed again, pawing at the door, and then sat down expectantly in front of it. Vika's heart raced as she stared at the door. She had never been inside that room. It was locked, and no one ever went in there. But now, it seemed as though Whiskers was insisting that something was inside. "What do you think?" her friend asked, clearly unsure whether they should open it. "I don't know," Vika whispered. "But we have to find out." With a deep breath, she reached for the door handle, her hand trembling slightly. Something inside her told her that this was more than just a simple curiosity. Whiskers had found something important, and she needed to know what it was. As the door creaked open, Vika's mind raced. What could it be? What could Whiskers have found? But as the door slowly swung open, she felt a chill run down her spine. What was waiting for them on the other side was something that neither of them could have ever anticipated. And as Whiskers stepped inside the dark room, his eyes glowing in the dim light, Vika had no idea that this discovery would be the beginning of a whole new mystery, one that would change her life forever. Intrigue. Vika stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding. What could Whiskers have found in there? And how would it affect their lives from this moment on? Chapter 10. The beginning of a new story. Vika stood in the doorway, still slightly breathless from her discovery in the storage room. Whiskers, her faithful companion, had led her to this moment, one filled with mystery, uncertainty, and a strange sense of anticipation. But as she followed the kitten down the narrow hallway, she never expected the adventure that awaited her. Whiskers padded ahead, his tiny paws soft against the floor as he moved with purpose, meowing occasionally as if to check that Vika was still following. His tail flicked with excitement as he led her toward the courtyard. And then, just as she rounded the corner, Vika froze. There, by the old wooden fence, was another kitten. A small, trembling ball of fur, no older than Whiskers had been when she first found him. The little creature was stuck between the bushes and the fence, its eyes wide with fear and confusion. Vika's heart ached as she watched the kitten struggle. It was just like Whiskers had been, a helpless creature, lost and in need of help. Without hesitation, she rushed forward, crouching beside the kitten and gently coaxing it out from the space it was trapped in. "Don't worry," Vika whispered softly, as she cradled the trembling kitten in her arms. "I won't let anything happen to you." As the new kitten mewed softly, Vika looked around, her heart swelling with the realization that her story had just taken a new turn. The sense of responsibility she had felt when caring for Whiskers had only deepened now that she was holding another life in her hands. This was no longer just about saving one kitten. It was about a chain of kindness, a cycle of helping those who couldn't help themselves. She glanced down at the little creature in her arms, then at Whiskers, who had walked over to sniff the newcomer curiously. Vika smiled, her heart swelling with love for both of them. She understood now. Her journey was only beginning, and it wouldn't stop with just one rescue. As she walked back to her apartment, holding the new kitten against her chest, Vika thought about the future. She had always believed that her life would be simple, that her days would follow one another in a quiet, predictable rhythm. But since that first day when she found Whiskers, her life had been filled with surprises, challenges, and unexpected twists. Her parents had noticed the change, too. They had seen how much more responsible she had become. Her mother no longer scolded her for spending too much time with the kittens. If anything, she encouraged it. Her father, who had always been indifferent toward animals, now found himself taking part in conversations about their care and well-being. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, her mom looked at Vika and smiled. "You know, I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we should adopt more animals. It could be a good way to teach you about responsibility and compassion." Vika's eyes widened. "Really? You mean, we could adopt more pets?" Her mom nodded. "Yes, I think we should. It could be a good way to show you how much we've all learned. Plus, you've done an amazing job with Whiskers and the new kitten. I think it's time we make this a bigger part of our lives." Vika's heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what she had hoped for, even if she hadn't known how to ask. She beamed with excitement. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll take care of them." Her father chuckled and ruffled her hair. "We'll all help, Vika. We're a family now, and it's time we all take care of each other, animals included." The shift in her family's attitude toward animals felt like a small but meaningful victory. Vika knew that she was not alone in this journey anymore. Her parents, too, were beginning to understand what it meant to care for the creatures around them, to show love and kindness to those who were vulnerable. It wasn't long before Vika took matters into her own hands, organizing a Help the Animals Day in her building's courtyard. She invited her neighbors, her friends, and even people from the surrounding area to join in, offering supplies and raising awareness about animal care. She wanted to make sure that everyone knew how important it was to help those in need. On the day of the event, the courtyard buzzed with activity. There were pet food drives, adoption booths, and volunteers handing out flyers on responsible pet ownership. Vika's heart swelled with pride as she watched everyone come together for a cause she held so dear. As the sun began to set and the courtyard filled with laughter and warmth, Vika stood at the center of it all, holding her two beloved kittens, Whiskers and the new one, who was now curled up peacefully in her arms. She realized in that moment that she had found her purpose. She was meant to help, to protect, and to show the world the importance of kindness. But as she looked down at the kittens, something caught her eye. A small, shadowy figure darted past the fence at the far end of the courtyard. Vika's heart skipped a beat. Could it be another animal in need? Another life to save? With a smile, she turned to her friends. "I think we've got more work to do." Final intrigue. Vika's gaze lingered on the shadowy figure as it disappeared into the night, knowing that no matter how many lives she saved, her journey was far from over. And with Whiskers by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next.